Hello, amateurs. Welcome to episode 102 of the Amateur Rugby Podcast, here to help soothe your Sunday morning hangover with some terrific rugby chat about the grassroots of the game. I'm your host, Tim, and I've got another awesome guest for you today. He's a director of rugby at Scottish Super Six franchise, the Ayrshire Bulls. He's a Scotland B international. Do you remember those? And he plied me with the most delicious mushroom soup when I met him at Ayr during the great Rugger run last year. Please welcome Mr. John Brown. John, how are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you, Tim. Glad to see that you've recovered from your efforts over the summer.
Yeah, I have indeed. And welcome to the show. And I'd like to start with something that you just spoke about at pre-recording, which was what you've been up to this morning. So I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Well, this morning, it was the usual Monday morning, and walking up to the rugby club, which is about a mile and a bit away, to take part with our walking rugby group. This has been going on since a year past in September, and we're there every Monday morning. We start about 10. Rules are a wee bit flexible in terms of the walking side of things. A lot of us do walk, but there's one or two that are a wee bit quicker than the walking. And we play for about 45 minutes, 50 minutes, and then it's back into the clubhouse for a bacon roll and a cup of coffee and the important chat. And as I say, this has been going on since a year past in September. And today was actually the first day that it rained on a Monday morning on us. We've been remarkable in terms of, it's been cold some days, the pitch has been sort of frosty and hard, but today was the first day where we actually got wet while we're out playing walking rugby, which is astonishing considering the weather we have in this country.
Absolutely. And I've been to your lovely clubhouse. I can imagine that after getting a little bit wet and cold, going in there must have been really cozy and lovely.
Yes, it was. Yeah. And we had, I think it was about 6 aside today. So we had a smaller pitch on the far side of the second 15, making sure we're not damaging any of the pitches. And as I say, it's quite good. Over the last couple of weeks, we've introduced a new rule, which is in order to score a try, the last pass must be backwards. And it has changed. It has changed the way we've played. So other than that, you can pass any direction. But if in the allowing the passing of any direction, it allows everyone to take part, even those that are maybe of restricted mobility. So, as I say, it's fun. It's no pressure. We do keep score, which over the last few weeks we're saying why? Because it's always, next try's the winner at the end of the game. So it doesn't matter. You could be 14 or 15 scores down, but if you get the last try or the next try's the winner, that's you. You can walk in and go, yep, we won. So as I say, no pressure on us.
Fabulous. I love that. Last try wins is always a great way to score. Now let's talk about the Ayrshire Bulls a little bit. So towards the end of the show, I always ask people what their favourite kits are and what their least favourite kits are. And quite often it's come up, it's been the Stade Francais kit, the pink one. Now, Ayrshire Bulls playing pink, don't they? So I'm wondering what it's like and how long that's been going on.
The Ayrshire Bulls don't actually play in pink as such. The Ayrshire Bulls strips mainly black with thin pink lines. The club side play in pink and black stripes. And the club's 125 years old this year. So for most of that time, we literally have been the only club in the world that have played in pink and used pink in their strips. However, if you see what's happening nowadays, more in like Stade Francais, they introduced their pink strip. Cardiff Blues, their URC away strips being pink. I even think Gloucester have used a pink strip in various games. So, as ever, Ayr are the trendsetters in this particular area. And no issue. Very happy to wear pink and black. as a strip. Frequently, we've not really had, historically, we've not had to change strip for a clash of jerseys. And so from that point of view, we have had a number of variations on it, but the plain stripe, pink and black stripe, yep, it's quite impressive indeed. You're not going to get any negatives out of us from that point of view. But the Bulls, their main strip, as I say, was black with a thin pink stripes in it, with a white away strip. So from that point of view, yep, we're happy with our pink and black.
Good stuff. Now, actually, this is a good time to talk about it. Can we just sort of describe the difference between the club side and the Super 6 franchise for people that don't know?
Right. Over a number of years, the SRU have looked at the club structure in Scotland. Was you had a number of divisions. The top division in Scotland was the Premiership. Then you had Division 1, 2, 3, etc., and then regional leagues underneath. And over a number of years, there was discussions on how to improve the links between the club system in Scotland and the two professional sides, Glasgow and Edinburgh. And the general view over the years was that the gap between the two was too big, between Glasgow and Edinburgh and the Premiership sides. Having said that, I have followed rugby all my life. I have watched the Premiership all my life when Ayr were in it. And I have to say, hand in heart, Glasgow and Edinburgh used to release players down to the Premiership clubs when they weren't required for Glasgow and Edinburgh. And in all those years, I only ever saw one pro player that made a huge impact on a game. And that was Jamie Ritchie, the current Scotland captain, when he was a young lad just coming through the Edinburgh system, played for Boroughmuir against Ayr in the old Premiership. At a time when Boroughmuir was struggling in the league, and Ayr were top of the league, and Jamie dominated that game. He basically won that game for Boroughmuir when they should never have won that game. So in all the years I've watched it, that's the only time I've ever seen a pro player make a massive impact on a game of rugby and effectively change that game of rugby. So from that point of view, there was discussions between the SRU and the Premiership clubs. And the Premiership clubs apparently were asked to go away and think, how could we improve and close the gap to the professional side? And my understanding was that lots of teams had different views, different opinions, and no one could agree on a way to go ahead. So certain people within the SRU came up with this idea of a super sides, whereby the SRU would contribute funding towards it, and the clubs had to contribute funding for it. And clubs were invited to apply for for a license, a franchise within the SRU. Now, a number of clubs did apply for it, and it ended up that, according to the SRU, only 6 clubs met the criteria. And the big, or 2 big bones of issue were that Glasgow, no club in Glasgow got a franchise, which is Scotland's biggest city, and that Edinburgh got 3 franchises. And prior to that, SRU had said, well, no area would get more than 2 franchises. So immediately that got various clubs' hackles up in that, well, you've said this, you've said this, you've said this, and it hasn't happened. So effectively, the Super 6 sides were up and running. First year, it was partially played, and then obviously COVID hit. So the season was interrupted, as was all rugby throughout the UK. Post-COVID, we have introduced the league programme between the clubs, and I have to say that year on year, the Super 6 product is far better now than it was in the first years. The top 2 or 3 teams are of a very high standard. The final between the Ayrshire Bulls and Watsonians in November was a high-class game that finished even at the end of full time and went into extra time. And the high performance department at the SRU were very happy with that. The standard of the game, the product, and hopefully it's going to continue to grow. Now, the SRU consider the Super 6 as a vehicle for players, coaches, and backroom staff to move from the amateur game into the professional game. So from an Ayrshire Bulls point of view, we have lost a number of players from Super 6 into the professional game, a number of whom have been capped as well by Scotland. We have lost two of our coaches of the Super 6 side have initially been involved, or we've lost them to the Glasgow Warriors. And in fact, both Peter Murchie and Pete Horn have gone from Glasgow and have been involved in the Scotland setup. And our most recent loss is Glenn Tippett, who was our general manager. And he's gone to a commercial role within Glasgow Warriors. So from the original remit of being a stepping stone from an amateur game into the professional environment, we at Ayrshire Bulls have certainly made our contribution to that from a playing point of view, a coaching point of view, and a backroom point of view. So we can hold up our hands and say, yeah, we've made it, and we will continue to try and do that. The bone of contention, we just had the Premiership finals over the weekend, and the problem is that a number of teams who applied for the Super 6 license and didn't get it are still in the Premiership. Part of the deal was, if you got a Super 6 franchise, your Club 15 had to drop from the Premiership down into National 1. So National 1 over the last 2 or 3 years has been probably the most competitive, well, I would say the most competitive league. And, each of the different clubs and different leagues would argue, well, theirs is. But when you consider the teams that are in there and the franchises, etc., with only one team going up, then it really is a struggle. It really is a struggle.
I can imagine. So, John, how does the season work then? Because you said the Super 6 final was in November or December. So what are those players doing now? What are those players doing now?
Those players from the Super 6 players, they effectively, their close season has been from end of November, mid to end of November, through until end of January. So they've been going through pre-season training over the last month or so. Our first pre-season game is on Friday night against the Newcastle Falcons down at Newcastle. So that game kicks off at 7:45 on Friday night. And then we'll have another pre-season game the following Friday night. We're up at Stirling Wolves. Now, meantime, the other Super 6 sides, the Southern Knights, the Melrose, the team based in Melrose, they've already had a couple of games against the Newcastle Falcons for warm-ups. The 3 Edinburgh clubs, they're having a sort of mini tournament type thing, controlled tournament in the lead up to their season. And the Super 6 sprint season starts on the 7th or the weekend of the 7th of April. Now, this year, the SRU have decided to include a Glasgow A15 and an Edinburgh A15 to give, players not playing in the URC game time. So to begin with, Glasgow A team will play against the 3 Super 6 sides linked to Glasgow Warriors. So that's the Ayrshire Bulls, Stirling Wolves, and Boroughmuir Bears. And the 3 Edinburgh teams, Heriots, Watsonians, and the Southern Knights, will have games against Edinburgh A. And then that will be played through, and then the final games of the Super Sprint Series this year take place at the end of May. And first will play second, third will play fourth, fifth will play sixth over that weekend. Again, we've got televised games. These games are televised on a Friday night, and a game on a Saturday at 5 p.m. will all be televised. And, you know, a couple of years, Super 6 Sprint Series, last spring, I think it was last spring, the Ayr Watsonians game had 25,000 people watching that at its height. So SRU are very happy with that. We as a club are very happy with that coverage. And our new general manager, Graham Ferguson, will be using the numbers from that game to help him generate sponsorship around the area with the club. Because we can go to a potential sponsor and say, well, if you give us X amount for this board, you know, that's the numbers that are watching the game, you know, twice a week, plus a highlights program. So from that point of view, we use it as a marketing tool. And I would say we're probably the most successful team in doing that, the way we link it in. Certainly when Glenn Tippett was there, his numbers were very impressive. And as you saw, you know, saw some of the boards at the club, we've got, you know, 3 and 4 high round the pitch.
It was very impressive. Stacks of sponsors. Now tell me, in terms of the rugby itself, how do the Bulls and the Ayr club support each other? Is there like close relationships between the coaching and playing staff? How does it work?
Right. Basically, from our point of view, going back over a season and a bit, the Ayrshire Bulls have trained Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday nights, and the club team train a Tuesday and a Thursday night. On a Monday night, going back really since we were established, we have had an open opportunity for coaches in the area at any level, or, you know, players playing at senior clubs to come down on a Monday night and effectively, if you're a coach, watch what's happening, watch how the Bulls are training, or for certain players to come along and see how they compare, and to see if young players with ambition can come down and train with the Bulls and then see how they get on. And there's no ties, there's no link. You know, you're not tied to Ayr or the Bulls. Come down, see how you get on, and then go back to your club and teach the people round about what you've learned on that night. From the club's point of view, on a Tuesday and perhaps a Thursday night, yes, they do more and more. They're beginning to train together in that, you know, controlled games. So if the Bulls are wanting to try something or the club are wanting to try something, we've got ready-made opposition. So from that point of view, they have been working together. It's made a huge difference. Our Club 15 are still relatively young. Sadly, we lost on Saturday to Kelso, which was really a winner-take-all to go up to the Premiership. So while it's not out of the cards yet, and I've tried to say to the boys, look, you know, keep going. Two final games, 2 bonus point wins. You never know what's going to happen. Kelso could slip up. But we had a big crowd down at Kelso on Saturday. The play by both sides was very good, really committed. Kelso themselves, they had people down at 7 o'clock on Saturday morning taking covers off the pitch and clearing snow off the pitch. Their covers had been on all week to ensure that game had gone on. So it was a great advert for the community game. and the spirit in the borders, and we took a full supporters bus down, plus lots of cars. So there's a great atmosphere there. And it's just from our point of view, it was a pity that we lost. There were opportunities to win the game, but on this occasion, second half, Kelso strangled the game and deserved to win it. No issues with Saturday's result.
Yeah, tell me, John, a little bit more about the psychology of going down to the borders to play rugby. I know it's a very special thing, and I certainly soaked up a bit of that when I was up there in Scotland, but I'd like to hear it from yourself.
Well, historically, yes, as a player in the 70s and early 80s, it was not a place you looked forward to going down to. That certainly has changed over the last maybe 5-10 years in the Premiership, because Ayr as a club, we won the league 3 or 4 times, we won the cup 3 or 4 times, and a big rivalry grew between ourselves and Melrose. A friendly rivalry, but a rivalry nevertheless. But over the last 10-15 years, no, we have feared no one within the club setup, and we look forward to going down and playing in the borders. But as I say, in my day, no, it wasn't quite like that. There were a number of times when you come back with your, having been well and truly thumped, both on the pitch and in the surrounding areas from that point of view. Yeah, you didn't look forward to it at all. But having said that, the crowds down there have always been brilliant. Very vociferous when you're on the pitch, but when you're off the pitch, no, they're great. And all they're interested in is the game of rugby and what's happening and how the borders can actually get together. It was interesting on Saturday, big crowd down at Kelso, but there were a number of people from Jed that I knew. I was speaking to a guy in the first half and I was down one pitch, and he was from Melrose. So he'd come over from Melrose to watch the game. And that's, there were a couple of other big games. The Premiership final was on at Hoyk, between Hoyk and Curry Chieftains. That was on Saturday. And there was another game in Peebles. So there were other opportunities. Oh, of course. And there was a little match between Gala and Melrose on Saturday as well. So, there were a number of major games on in the borders, and certainly the game at Hoyk had a big crowd. The game at Kelso that we were at had a big crowd. So for the right level of rugby, or should I say the right engagement of those spectators, there are certainly crowds there. And at the moment, those crowds from the borders don't appear to have embraced the Super Six. And that's what the Super Six teams have got as a challenge, to try and to get the other teams going, or to become more involved and want their Super Six side to do better. And I think there are a number of ways that we could do that and improve things. And part of that is the player movement side of things. And we need to get to a situation where if a player comes from another club, so if a player from Kelso goes and plays for the Southern Knights or joins that group, if he's not required on the 23 for the Southern Knights, then he should be going back to play for Kelso, or he goes back to play for Selkirk, or he goes back to play for Hoyk. Okay, certainly from the Ayrshire Bulls' point of view, if we have got a player in, then we would not expect that player, if he's not required to go and play for the Ayr club, if he didn't have a connection with the Ayr club. And I think a lot of the players from or clubs from the Premiership, it's not the players, it's the clubs from the Premiership, don't really grasp that. They think, if a player goes to a Super Six side, they'll join their club side. And that's not what should happen. And part of that is this, the issue with the Premiership, which I think they're easing their attitude, but they're effectively saying, no. If someone's joined a Super Six side, that's it. They can't play down. Well, I'm sorry. To me, that's a nonsense. Scotland are only going to succeed in improving numbers if we get every fit and available player that's available for a Saturday playing for some team. Play somewhere. And it means if, Stirling County, if they've got a third 15 or a fourth 15 out and they're one player short or two players short, that they could go to Alloa or Stirling University or a club local to that to borrow one or two players in to make sure that 30 players get a game on the Saturday, rather than all being, oh, no, we can't do that because we're tied, or we need X number of front row players. Well, okay, we don't need X number of we don't need 6 front row players for a second 15 game to go ahead. That's just a nonsense. Okay, it may well be we have the 3 front row players and then a front row player gets injured. Well, go unopposed, because that way you're going to have 30 players playing. If you have to restrict the fact that you need 6 front row players for a second 15 game around Scotland, you're stopping players playing. And if you stop players playing week on week, they're going to go and find something else to do. So that's why I rant over.
Well, I completely agree with you. And I mean, it's literally happening at the moment before our eyes, I think, in lots of countries, not just Scotland, where throughout the COVID period, where people have found that they've enjoyed doing other things and haven't come back to the game. We need to do everything we can to encourage games to be on and everybody to be able to play if they want to at the highest level that they can as well.
That's right. And we need to have mobility in the club game, and that goes all the way down. From the Scotland setup. If players aren't playing, they should be back at Glasgow and Edinburgh playing there. And if Glasgow and Edinburgh don't need their however many pros they've got, okay, you've got a third injured at a time, but you still will have 5 or 6 players not playing. They should be playing somewhere every week. Now, when Super 6 is on, then okay, drop down and play Super 6. If Super 6 isn't on, drop down and play in Premiership. From that point of view, it's at the highest level that these players should be playing. And of course, everyone is interested in safety. And the question is, if someone's full-time pro player and playing at Premiership or National 1 level, is that person a danger to the amateur players or the players that are only training 2 or 3 times a week? Now, okay, potentially yes, but I have not seen the pro players are sensible. They know what they do and don't do, particularly the forwards, particularly the front row guys. They know exactly what to do and how to operate within the front row. They're not going to deliberately try and injure anyone nowadays. It just doesn't happen. They play the game properly. They will support the opposition player. Yes, they'll try and get the better of them, but not to put that player in danger. And the other thing as well is youngsters that are serious about the game, they're in weights programs at 14, 15, 16. And, they're doing lots of conditioning work all the way through their youth setup. And, unfortunately, I watched the whole of the Scotland under-20s against Ireland under-20s on Friday night. And, Scotland shipped 82 points against the Ireland side. But, these Ireland players, friends of mine are involved with, have been involved with Irish schools. And most of these kids are in training from 6 o'clock in the morning in your top Irish schools. And then they've got academy structures. All the districts over in Ireland, the provinces, they've got their own academy structures. And so these guys are getting proper training, proper conditioning all the way from 14, 15. And yes, it was disappointing watching the Scotland game on Friday night, but I'll guarantee you, these guys, these Scotland boys, went out and did the best that they could under the circumstances. They were not falling off tackles. They were trying their best, as they will do this weekend against Italy. And it's just a matter of, it's the system and the setup that's failing them at the moment. And a lot of the under-20s at the moment were the ones that came through COVID when nothing happened. No conditioning, no gym work, no team sports, nothing. So from a Scottish point of view, we need to look at our academy setup. We need to look to see what we can do better, how we can involve the clubs, how we can involve the players going back to play at the clubs. And we need to look at the coaching at the clubs to say, well, you look at a club that's maybe even in the second division, like Glasgow Accies in the second division, have got two superb coaches, two ex-Scotland international coaches, and a young 18, 19-year-old going through the Glasgow Academy would learn an awful lot from Ryan Grant, who's an ex-British Lion, who's doing the forward coaching at Glasgow Accies, and Rory Jackson, who played professionally with Glasgow, Scotland and Bath, as the backs coach and head coach. Now, an 18, 19-year-old going to Glasgow Accies is going to learn a lot more from those two than he is sitting with some guy that's come through an SRU program as a development officer, and then going back to play for some Premiership second 15 on a Saturday. So we need to, in Scotland, look at that whole system. Let's look at what we're doing with the youngsters. How are we improving their setup? Now, to an extent, the SRU have sort of jumped in here because they've announced that you asked about the Super 6 season. Well, Super 6 is, we've got this Super Sprint series, which involves Glasgow and Edinburgh A teams, and that's happening from beginning of April to the end of May, where each of the teams sort of play once against each other once. But when the league starts in August next year and will run again through to November, the SRU have added a team to the Super 6, and it's a development 15. And the aim for that is to include the Scotland under-20s or the under-19s in the lead up to be able to get them proper coaching, proper conditioning, and lead into the under-20s Championship Six Nations next year, so they're better prepared. Kenny Murray, who's the under-20s coach, had said that the French under-20s team that they had played last year, most of these boys had played a number of games in the Pro 14, the top 14 in France. And our under-20 players, two of them had played once for Glasgow. It's just
a huge difference.
It's huge difference. So it's a start. It's a way of improving. It is going to take time for the under-20s because someone that's 19, 20 is going to struggle against a 28-year-old, 29-year-old that's been playing the game initially. The question mark that's been raised by Premiership, National One and other clubs is, well, if you're taking out all the under-20s, under-19s from the Super 6 side, where are you going to fill these players from? And then that goes back to my earlier point about we need to have more mobility and being able to move back and forward between teams. And from that point of view, we need to start working together rather than being our own side of things.
Yeah, what is stopping that mobility at the moment, John?
Personal, what's in it for me, mate, is basically what the problem is. Clubs looking after their own interests. The disparity or the thing between certain clubs in the Premiership initially didn't want any movement between the Super 6 and the Premiership because they were not happy that they either didn't get the Premiership or they thought it was a challenge to their club. But I mean, it's a matter of, well, it's a challenge to their club because of the system and the methods that are being put in place. So if you historically have lost a player, so if you're Curry or Edinburgh Accies in Edinburgh and you've lost a player to one of your Super 6 sides in Edinburgh, then you're not going to get that player back. But that was what the Premiership clubs wanted at that time. Now, I do believe that there's been a bit more reality put in by the Premiership teams in meetings with the SRU, and I think they're more interested in releasing players up and getting players back. But it needs to go further than that. It needs to go so that players go down to, I would say that when a player signs Super 6 or signs Glasgow Edinburgh, they nominate who their home club is, who their club of origin is, so that if they're not required, then they go back to that club. And it will allow players to be more freely available to go and play for clubs. And by the same token, it will also allow supporters of those clubs to go and watch Super 6 games, because they won't feel, I'm supporting another club. It shouldn't be like that. It's go and support the players that have come through your club, that will come back to your club, and let's try and improve the lot of Scottish rugby and produce more and more players for the Scotland setup, for Glasgow and Edinburgh. And it was, the ultimate aim is to stop us importing players from abroad into the Scottish game with only two fully professional sides. Why are we bringing in people from Argentina or the South Seas, places like that? We should have one or two potential superstars brought in to each of the two sides, and the rest should really be all Scottish. And at the moment, the argument that Glasgow and Edinburgh will say is that, well, we have to be competitive in the URC, and if we only go Scottish, at the moment, we cannot be competitive because there's such a big gap between your semi-pro and your club game and your professional setup. And it will be interesting because, Ayrshire Bulls last year played against Glasgow Warriors up in Inverness, very last minute when Worcester Warriors were unable to fulfil a pre-season game. And admittedly, it was a Glasgow Warriors seconds, third 15 that Ayrshire Bulls played. But we gave them a fright. And I would argue that we perhaps should have beaten them. Now, as I say, that was after we had played 2 or 3 of the Sprint Series games. And it was also after their first game of the season. So there were reasons for that. But it's interesting that the SRU have looked at that and now introduced Glasgow A and Edinburgh A into the Super 6 side. And it should work both ways. It will give players from those two teams the opportunity to play games, but it will also hopefully give the opportunity of the Super 6 sides to catch the eyes of the coaches and the managers of Glasgow and Edinburgh and think, okay, so next time they need a winger or next time they need whoever, instead of having to go to Argentina or South Africa or whatever, they'll go to Ayrshire Bulls, Southern Knights, Watsonians or whatever and go, right, come and play for us for a while and sign dual registrations.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you've taken 2 examples from Ireland and France, the 2 top teams in the world at the moment. And it just seems to me that what they've got going for them is everybody's pushing or pulling in the same direction. From what you're describing, that's not quite the case in Scotland at the moment.
I think over the last year, we're getting better. But certainly, if you read any of the media support for the game of rugby in Scotland, there's very, very many people totally against Super 6. The SRU, at the behest of the clubs, or the clubs within who are the SRU, they wanted to go back to the district setup. Historically, Scotland have had your club set up, and then above your clubs, you've had your districts, which are Glasgow, Edinburgh, the South, and North and Midlands. And initially, that's where, when pro rugby came in, that's where the SRU tried to keep the setup, but there weren't enough players at the time. All 4 districts were getting thumped when they played other teams throughout the country. And it was disappointing. But having said that, I mean, if we go back even 15, 20 years, our own club Ayr, we had home and away fixtures against Cardiff on an international weekend. We played home and away games against Pontypool when Pontypool were at the height. Glasgow Hawks, they beat Toulouse, a full Toulouse side. Melrose, I think, had played Newcastle Falcons when Newcastle Falcons were the top club in England. So historically, on one-offs, clubs have been able to compete at the highest level. But these in England, Ireland, they've gone just different ways, totally different ways. And now there's no way a club side in Scotland would be able to compete with your URC sides or your top English Premiership sides from that point of view.
Yeah, it sounds like the model you've got now is very much based on how New Zealand do it. With movement up and down, and it definitely works for them. But I'd imagine a big part of that is that historically it's always been that way. So trying to introduce something makes it much harder. Yeah,
I mean, there's no doubt. As I say, well, the oldest game is the Edinburgh Glasgow game. That's the 1872 Cup. So it's been going on since 1872. The rivalry between Glasgow and Edinburgh. So that was the historical match between the within Scotland, and then the borders in North Midlands also, and we used to have the Anglo-Scots involved as well, and all that was to produce teams for the international trial that would be played at the beginning of January, which would lead into your Scotland teams for the internationals, and did it work? Well, yeah, it worked in that Scotland were successful occasionally, not as often as we would have wanted to, not as successful as Wales, for example. But when you come into a professional side of things, you had a choice. You either kept your 4 district sides and run them at that time as a semi-pro side, which we proved didn't work, or try and do something different. And, this is trying to do something different. Now, is Super 6 right? I think 6 teams is too few. I'm still not convinced about the structure of the season yet. It is good that we're playing in the best of the summer, so the actual league programme will be August through until November. But it's ironic that your finals in November, when the weather's not very good, when last year there were some absolutely brilliant games of rugby, but the final itself, while it was a really good game of rugby, to an extent it was spoilt by a gale force wind blowing down from one corner of the pitch to the other, which, as I say, comparing it to games in August and September when weather was brilliant, it was disappointing that the final was at that time of year. So let's try and work together. Let's try and get Super 6 up to Super 8. Let's try and get more clubs involved. Let's try and get the movement of players back and forward, and let's try and get players playing the game. That's the important thing.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, that's a great way to finish this part of the chat, John. Let's move on to the stash section, if that's okay. What's your favourite bit of stash that you've ever received?
Well, you see, in my day, we didn't get kit given to us. We had to buy all our kit. The only thing I ever got, I was in the Scotland B team, and we got one tracksuit. Right, I had to buy my shorts myself. I had to buy my socks myself. I had to buy my boots myself. We got the top given to us, which I swapped for a French one. We just had a normal top with the Scotland badge, etc. But the French top I got was a white top, and it was Adidas was given, and the number in the back was felt. The 3 stripes, the 15 was felt. and the badges were felt, and it was quality piece of kit totally compared to our one. We just had a normal jersey that we handed over. But really, that's the only bit of kit I was ever given. It's not that nowadays where, even our second 15, they get handed kit and tops and things like that, which they get as part of their membership fees. So from my point of view, I got, as I say, a blue Adidas tracksuit top with a Scotland badge on it and my top, and that's it. The rest of the kit, you had to buy yourself and pay for. I remember going up there was a place, proper woolen socks I used to buy for the Navy socks for the Scotland side of things, went up to for size up in Glasgow to get those because they're the only place you could get them. And I remember in the old days when we had the big game to open our stand that you saw the pictures of, Jeff Squire was playing for the International 15. I remember, was it later that year? It must have been later that year. He was away with the Lions. And even in those days, the players had to take their own kit for the warm-up. And he was wearing the kit, the jersey that he was given at Ayr to go, and he took to New Zealand as his warm-up kit when they were doing the training away from that. So in those days, you didn't get a lot of kit from that point of view. You weren't
that French shirt sounds amazing though, John. Have you still got it?
Yes, somewhere. I don't even know where it is, but it is somewhere. Sad to say, there's no way I would fit it nowadays. No, there's no way I would even fit it, which just goes to show the size difference in those. Yeah. I would argue that we did wash it a couple of times, and it obviously shrunk in the wash, being white.
Obviously, it's been a long time.
I'll stick to it.
Yeah. So next question, what is your favourite kit of all time? So this can be any team from any era.
I have to say that the Scottish Sevens team used to have this amazing navy top with a thistle on the sort of chest that took out half the body, and it was an amazing top. I really did like that one. Yeah, that was definitely the way they wove the thistle into the top. Was really quite impressive. So that's from an international top. From a club or select top, my favourite top was the Saltires top. It was an invitational team, and it was a navy top with a white cross, Saltire cross on it. And I liked that one. I really did like that one.
They both sound great. Now, what about an awful kit? Any of the modern kits or even old day kits that you dislike?
Wasn't so much it wasn't an awful kit as such, but the old Glasgow strips, when I played the occasional game for Glasgow, was a white top, white shorts, and red socks. And it wasn't the fact it was awful, it was just you couldn't keep it clean, because you had to take them away and wash them yourselves. And it was really hard to get your shorts clean after playing at Hughenden or down in the border somewhere. That wasn't particularly good. An awful strip, I'm just trying to think from the point. Some of the ones that some of these French teams have come up with, you do wonder who was on what when they came up with that design.
Yeah, there's been some out there ones from France, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So we'll bring this towards a close now, John. But before we do, is there anything else you want to add, or any closing thoughts?
No, it's just a matter of I'm saying this to the kids that are coming through playing rugby. Okay, those kids that have come through mini rugby started maybe playing in primary 3, primary 4, primary 5, and gone all the way through the club. I run all the way through to under 18s. Our ambition at Ayr is to make sure that the kids that have come through our club, first of all, enjoy what they're doing. They enjoy playing the game. They enjoy being in the company of the people that are in their team, and they enjoy the coaching that they're getting. But the success will be determined by the number of those under 18s that continue to play rugby when they leave school or they leave under 18 level. Now, I'm not saying they all come back and play for Ayr, because most of them will go off to university, but play rugby at university. Go and join a club team near where you're going to university. But please continue to play the game after your under 18 setup. The best thing about rugby is the friends you meet in the game, not necessarily from your own club, but from clubs abroad, around the country. To be able to go to the borders, like Kelso on Saturday, I met 2 or 3 guys I've not seen since I was playing, and it's as though you spoke to them yesterday. Adam Roxburgh, Eric Paxson, people like that. They're just great guys, interested in rugby, want the game of rugby to be the success it can be, and to be such a good platform for young people to get on in life. The skills that they'll learn playing the team sport with respect and honesty will do them good stead from now on.
Yeah, fabulous. Well said, John. I couldn't agree more. Now, if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Probably through LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the best one, or through the rugby club, Ayr Rugby Club, or Ayrshire Bulls Rugby Club, through Twitter accounts, anything like that. That would be passed on to me.
Okay, so the Twitter account for the Ayr Rugby Club is official Ayr RFC, and Ayrshire Bulls is at Ayrshire Bulls. And everybody listening at home, I will link everything that we've talked about today in the show notes below, which can be found at one place at amateurrugbypodcast.com. So, John, it just leaves me to say thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure chatting to you today.
Pleasure. Thanks very much, Tim.
All right, there he goes. John, thanks so much. Clearly very, very passionate about rugby development up there in Scotland and worldwide, I guess. So thank you for that. Now, what did you think of last week's episode with Bertie from Edinburgh Accies? It's such a nice guy and doing incredible things with his feats of endurance alongside a full-time job coaching. But I'd love to hear your thoughts too. So you can contact me over email on hello@amateurrugbypodcast.com. And you can join me again next week when my guest will be Jason Conlin from Stewart's Melville RFC. Now, I met John on the Great Rugger Run last year, and I'm just starting to think about the Great Rugger Run 2023. I haven't decided where, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. It's got to be some kind of rugby hotbed somewhere. I'm thinking late August, early September, just before the World Cup. So let me know again if you've got any thoughts or if you think I should come to a club near you. Over best, hello@amateurrugbypodcast.com. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, you can rate and review on your podcast player, like, share, retweet, all that stuff. But what I'd really like is if you mention it to someone in person the next time you're down your local rugby club. But until then, get out and play.